Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Coresight and Blue Yonder's Open for Business. Today's special guest is David Hardiman-Evans, SVP at Ocado Solutions. We'll now turn it over to JoAnn Martin of Blue Yonder and Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks, Drew, and good morning and welcome to Open for Business. I am your co-host, Deborah Weinswig, and I am honored to be joined by my co-host, JoAnn Martin, who is the VP of Retail at Blue Yonder. JoAnn has extensive strategic retail experience and a proven track record across apparel, footwear, and accessories, including L Brands, DSW, and Luxottica. In her role at Blue Yonder, she is the industry thought leader for retail and continues to support the industry through her out-of-the-box ideas on collaboration and innovation. With that, I'll turn the call over to JoAnn for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Deborah. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Blue Yonder is a global end-to-end supply chain platform company, and we are formerly known as JDA. We leverage our platform to help manufacturers and retailers gain supply chain visibility and help them to detect proactively disruptions in their logistics, demand, supply, and workforce. So as supply chain has risen to the forefront of conversations during COVID, we've had the ability to work with many retailers and manufacturers to understand the challenges that they're having. There's several areas in which we seem to be gravitating the conversations to. It's about how do we understand the disruptions that are happening in both the logistics and the supply side. How are retailers and manufacturing leveraging the latest in technology like AI and ML to detect challenges in demand and supply? And lastly, how is the workforce being impacted? All of which we'll talk a little bit about today.
Great, thanks, JoAnn. Just a bit of background on David. So David Hardiman-Evans was appointed in September of 2017 as SVP of North America for Ocado Solutions. He is responsible for leading corporate partnership development activities. We originally met David when he joined Ocado in January 2012 as head of IR and corporate finance when we were back on Wall Street. Prior to Ocado, David was an investment banker and also spent some time as a chartered accountant. With my own background in banking and accounting, you can see why David and I get along so well. Today, we are going to discuss innovation in online grocery, Ocado's global growth, automation or robotics, and the supply chain of the future. As always, we will have a transcript and video available, and we'll launch poll questions after the start of the call. Lastly, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask a question. So with that, I'll kick things off. David, this is literally like the topic right now in terms of retail. How do you think that COVID has brought us to an inflection point for online grocery?
Firstly, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Deborah, for that very warm welcome. And also good morning, JoAnn, as well. It's very good to have you alongside. I suspect when we look back, we will see this as a very significant inflection point for grocery online. I think some of the transformational activity that we suspected would take several years in the grocery industry, we've seen actually taking place over the last few months. And with that, I think clearly online and how to best manage online in the grocery market has really risen to the top of most, if not all, boardroom agendas. I think, we've seen the surge in online demand, I think, for very obvious reasons during the COVID outbreak. I think the key question a lot of people, everybody will have on their minds is, what will this look like post-COVID, whatever post-COVID looks like, the new normal. And I think, it's perhaps a little premature to try and put a number on this. No one knows, actually, but we can look to, what some, we can see what some surveys are showing up in terms of consumer activity, but consumer behavior. We can see certainly what impact there's been in terms of demand levels. I think, so there's been a lot of surveys around. I think one of the interesting ones I saw recently was a Morgan Stanley survey, which was posing a critical question in terms of those who have gone online during the COVID period for the first time, how many expect to continue as we come out of this? Now, the interesting result was, over half of respondents said, yes, we're going to continue. We're going to continue shopping online. About another quarter said, we're not sure, but you can well imagine some of them will also continue. And only about 20% said in this survey, yes, I'm going to revert back to store shopping. So I think that's very interesting. I think the other thing that you can look at is, what does online penetration numbers look like in grocery now? And I think it's very timely because both Nielsen and Kantar published some more data this morning. And we've seen today, if you just take the UK, which is often regarded as one of the most highly penetrated online markets globally, between Kantar and Nielsen, they were suggesting that the penetration now in the UK for online in grocery is now somewhere between 11 and 13%. Now that's up from about 7% pre-COVID. So now, is that going to continue at that level post? We don't know. And if I link it back to the survey results that I was just mentioning, you can see that a fair chunk of that may well continue. The point being, it's going to continue from a higher base, and it's going to continue with a lot more attention from a consumer perspective going forward. And I think some of that is very interesting because we can look at data and we can look at survey results, but actually when you start thinking about it intuitively, you kind of see that it makes sense. Because one of the key hurdles, hump points for any consumer shopping online for the first time is in exactly that first time shop. Now, what's COVID actually encouraged a lot of consumers to do is get over that first hump. They've done that first shop. They've spent that time, that 45 minutes, 1 hour that it takes to perhaps set up their shopping list for the first time. And not only that, because COVID hasn't been a 1 week phenomenon, guess what? They've come back and done it again and again. And I think history has shown anybody who operates online in the grocery sector, once a customer becomes accustomed and shops somewhere 3, 4, 5 times online, they become very sticky. So I think that's very reflective in some of that survey results that I shared there. So I think, coming back to your question, I think when we move forward and we look back at this moment, I think we'll all recognize that there's been quite a significant step change in the interest from the consumer at this particular juncture, which will serve to be, a very key inflection point in the continued migration to online grocery.
David, those are really interesting, and they kind of pose the question too, when you start to think about that movement onto online, we all know historically grocers have operated with razor thin margins. So how should we start to think about the impacts to profitability for some of the grocers now that the shift has happened almost unexpectedly to the degree it has?
Yeah, I mean, JoAnn, I think you raise a great point. As I mentioned, I think, how to position our future business, our being any of our retailers who are out in the audience today, how should we position our retail business for the future with more and more online? And I think, the things that will probably be going through those board minds right now is reflecting on some of those points that I just raised in terms of, customers become sticky the more and more they do it. And this particular period in time is encouraging more and more people to do it. The other point is, as you rightly say, the grocery industry is characterized by razor thin margins. I would add a couple of points as well. It's also characterized by very large volumes. It's a volume business to accompany those razor thin margins, and very complex supply chains. So it is a complex conundrum, a complex set of challenges that grocers face. I think it is also, grocery has always been about two things in my mind. One is fulfilling and offering to the customer a proposition that is compelling. But of course, they have to be able to do that at the lowest possible cost. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable business. And I think as everybody thinks about how they position themselves, organize their businesses for a higher proportion of online business going forward, it is always about those two things. And that may cause some operators, most operators, to have to rethink around their cost bases, how they do things. Merely layering on additional cost to an existing operating model may not be the right answer, because you're impacting one half of the equation in a positive way, i.e. you're addressing the customer, but you're impacting the other half of the equation in a very negative way. You're just adding more cost. So it is a challenge.
David, you talk about this idea of kind of what's happening in boardrooms. As someone who sits on a few public boards, I mean, we're talking frequently, and supply chain is usually kind of at the top of that list. How do you think this, kind of idea of e-commerce and online, I mean, we're talking about, right, curbside and pickup and buy online, pickup in store, and all kinds of, I would say, topics that were previously lower on the list. So how do you think leaders should be thinking about, this as it relates to online grocery, and as we settle into this idea of a new normal?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Deborah, you raised a number of interesting words, phrases that accompany online grocery, and I think it's worthwhile just reflecting on that and perhaps cutting through a little bit. Online shopping is about ordering using some form of digital interface, and then you've got a fulfillment operation that's, because it's a physical business, you've somehow got to translate that online digital order into an actual order, a physical order, and that's around the fulfillment piece. And then you referenced pickup and you referenced delivery. To me, those are just different forms of last mile. They are different forms of how the order that's being fulfilled gets to the customer's home. And in one form, the customer is still doing a lot of that work, and in the other form, the retailer is providing that service. And I know there's, sitting here in the UK, and I'm in a fairly privileged position because I have the opportunity to speak to retailers and others involved in the grocery sector globally. It's less of a debate as to whether it's pickup versus delivery. It's not pickup versus delivery. It's, what do you want to offer the customer? What is it that the customer ultimately is seeking? And what is it that's offered in that market in a meaningful way? Because online grocery services, I think, as JoAnn has referred to in the previous question, razor thin margins means that it is a real challenge to offer a level of service which just offers more and more service to the customer, but more and more cost to the retailer. And hence there has been a reticence on many parts to offer more services. Unless you have the service, then of course, unless the service is good enough, customers don't take up that service. Now, the interesting part about this whole pandemic is that actually more and more customers, because of the circumstances we all find ourselves in, they've been taking whatever service has been available. So retailers have, in many cases, perhaps not been able to offer the level of service they would like to offer, but customers have been delighted to get a slot somewhere. So they have actually started their online journey with something that might be suboptimal to them as a consumer, and it's only going to get better. So there's a little bit of an irony there. But coming back to the looking at is it delivery, is it pickup, whether that's at a store or some other remote pickup location, it could be either. I mean, I think if you think about it intuitively, the ultimate service for a customer is actually home delivery. Why? Because this is grocery shopping. where do all the products that the customer orders have to actually end up? Well, they have to end up in that customer's refrigerator, in their pantry, in their bathroom, because they're all the items for the home. So the ultimate service is actually home delivery. But if sufficient home delivery services aren't available, or if the level of consistency of that service offering is not high enough yet, and pickup is the next best option, then they'll take the pickup. I think as services improve, particularly for home delivery, and that encourages, read into that, forces other competitors to up their game, you may see a bit of an invert in terms of that pickup versus delivery proportion. But I would suspect you'd see, particularly in the US, given where penetration for online is today, I would expect to see both grow.
So when you start to think about kind of that inflection point and moving more online, how do you think about the dark store methodology? I know that dark stores aren't new, but they're definitely a big discussion, especially for grocers that might have been caught a little off guard. So how should we think about dark stores and kind of their future?
Yeah, I mean, dark store as a terminology, again, is very interesting. Dark can mean different things to different people. Generally, it means it's dark to the customer, as in it's not open for general customer browsing. It generally refers actually to some sort of warehouse operation, and that warehouse operation can be entirely manual, or it can have automation in it. You could actually say the very highly automated, sophisticated customer fulfillment centers we build are actually dark stores. They're just dark to customers, you know, so they're warehouse operations generally. They could, in some cases, just be a physical store which is closed to customers. Equally, that could be a dark store. I think, you know, rather than getting too fixated in different terminology, it again comes back to what are you trying to achieve? And I come back to those really two core objectives. You're trying to achieve a level of proposition for the customer which is attractive, but you're trying to do it in a way that helps you change your cost base from a traditional grocery store. Now, if some form of dark store operation, be that an existing store which is turned dark, be it some sort of warehouse operation, be that manual, be that with some sort of automation, helps you to move somewhere towards reducing that cost base, changing that cost structure, then that's a good direction to be moving in.
You know, David, as someone who's studied the grocery industry for a long time, we've always looked to the UK for inspiration, and a lot of that around, you know, originally was click and collect. As we look at lessons from the UK, how can Ocado help inform the world? But also there have been some questions around scalability and flexibility of Ocado with this, you know, huge upsurge in demand.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we've seen what 10x the demand that we saw going into this crisis. We've seen 100x plus the web traffic. We've seen our average orders go up 50% pretty much across the board. The last set of results that we actually published recently showed sales up 40% plus year on year. Which we thought was fairly interesting for what was some people have suggested as being a fairly constrained capacity model. We don't feel it is. Clearly, we have done a few things that have helped us increase that capacity, particularly in this very difficult period for everybody. Some of the things that we have done, for example, we stopped the sale of bottled water for a period. Most people have a tap in their home, so if they really need a drink of water, they can get water. What that really enabled us to do was to service thousands more households on a weekly basis with orders, just by removing one category of product that people could get substitutes for. We also, for all of the 20 years of Ocado's existence as an actual retailer, we have done everything we can think of about encouraging people to come and shop with us. And I think for the first time in history, the one thing we had neglected to do was put in provision to help people and encourage them not to shop with us during this particular period. But I think, Deborah, it's an interesting point. Sales were up 40%. It was in a very managed way. Is it right that it's a missed opportunity not to be able to service every piece of demand that comes through the door? Well, if you think about it, if I'm in a stores business, is it right that I was not able to service every single customer who wanted to buy as much toilet paper or rice or pasta that they came in to buy? Because the shelves were bare. Now, is it right to say, well, you missed the demand opportunity there? Of course it's not. Do you build an operation? Do you build facility? Do you build capacity for a pandemic? No, you don't. What you do, however, and what it does is it does raise interesting questions around balancing capacity and demand, around balancing, speed and the service that you provide. And also thinking around range and space. And I think, the response of, I mentioned the bottled water in our case, but also the response of many retailers that we talk about and talk to has been to look at their assortment. We've seen assortment rationalization, not just for online purposes, but for store-based purposes as well. I think a phenomenon we saw in the UK early, which I think has been seen in pretty much every developed market in grocery shopping, has been the panic buying that we saw early on in the crisis. We saw empty shelves. We saw, the joke videos going around where the only thing on the shelf was Corona beer as you panned across. But, I think the retail industry has been, pretty quick to correct that within their supply chains. Also, both in terms of managing the customer through limiting the amount of certain items that they were permitted to purchase in one shop, and also working with their supply base in adjusting that in a relatively short space of time. So I think there are things that we've done specifically, as well as things that other retailers have done. I think the other important thing is, being very clear in who you're trying to serve. We instigated a very orderly queuing system relatively early on in the crisis, where we did prioritize two sets of customers in particular. One was our very loyal customers, the ones who shop with us very, very frequently, all of the time. And the other was to prioritize a government-approved list of vulnerable persons. So working with the government-approved list and being able to ensure that we were giving priority particularly to these two groups. And that has obviously enabled us to grow in this orderly fashion. I should also add, and I think perhaps to your question, Deborah, we also were able to work with our partner in the UK, Morrison's, which is another supermarket group in the UK that we enable from a technology and software perspective in their online business. And they have also experienced very rapid growth in their online business, partly enabled and partly supported by the capacity that we provide to them through our fulfillment centers, and partly also from the expansion of their in-store fulfillment operations, again, which is Ocado software provided, but they expand in a similar way to other retailers have been expanding their store-based online fulfillment. So clearly, yes, they've been able to expand that. Obviously, there's a difference in the cost of that expansion, because that does rely, of course, on the other valuable but expensive asset, which is labor.
So, David, it's fascinating to hear your discussion about water and some of the changes that you made. Assortment rationalization has absolutely been a big discussion within the grocery sector, but how do you see that long range when you start to think about assortments? Do you think it's a short term based off of supply, or do you think ultimately we will see a reassortment within the stores and a re-rationalization of space and contraction of SKUs long term?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we in many ways we see something different in perhaps in some of the European retail than we do in North American, and particularly the US. I think that the assortments generally in the US are bigger. You know, typically in the UK, an assortment might be somewhere between 15 to 25,000 SKUs, whereas in the US, it's very typical to see, anywhere 30 to 50,000. So I think the baseline is perhaps different. The principles are very similar, however. I think we've seen for some time, long before the COVID crisis struck this year, we've seen retailers looking at different ways in which they can help to address some of the cost issues. And one of the cost measures that some of the retailers have been looking at is range rationalization. Now, interestingly, that's at a time when Ocado, the retail business of Ocado, has only done one thing, and that's increase range, increase assortment. Because we see as very important consumer choice in what they buy, and assortment as being one of the very key assets of a retail firm to attract and encourage frequency and retention of that customer to come along. Interestingly, as consumers, if you buy, let's take our typical order, which might be 45, 50 items. We all buy 45, 50 items in a grocery shop, and we actually only buy from a relatively narrow range, a personal range. We might buy those 45 items from, 200 or 300 items. But everybody on this call today will have a different set of 200 or 300 items that they select from. And if you are the retailer that doesn't have the one item that Deborah absolutely has to have, she's going to go somewhere else to buy that item. But when she goes somewhere else to buy that item, the chances are she doesn't go somewhere else to buy that single item. She'll do a shop there. So at best, we'll lose Deborah's shop this time. At worst, Deborah will come back next week and say, you still don't have that item. I'm going to go back to shop B and shop there again. And remember what I was saying before, there's a certain stickiness that comes, particularly online, of shopping. When you get in the habit of shopping somewhere else, you start to get used to, the brands and the banners that are sold there. So at worst, we lose Deborah as a customer forever. So I think range is it's a very interesting one. It's a very dangerous one to rationalize too much. Now, clearly, you may take the view that you've already got, 40 pepperoni pizzas in your assortment. Do you really need 41? That's a perfectly sensible view to be taking. But, do you say I'm going to cut my 40 to 10 because actually the 10 account for 85% of my sales in pepperoni pizzas? Well, you're now ostracizing the people who bought the other 15, who may end up like Deborah going somewhere else. So I think range will continue to be a very important part of the customer proposition. But as I was saying before, I think there is there's a balance between, space and range. There's a balance between capacity and demand. And I think, these are all important things which retailers will be looking at.
David, I'm going to review the poll questions and results, but your topic around range is really interesting as we look at the first question, which is, when purchasing grocery items, are you purchasing more or less private label products? 26% are purchasing more, 62% are just buying whatever's in stock, and 12% are purchasing less. Is that consistent with what you would think?
Yeah, particularly the second point you made. They're buying whatever they can find. I know from our own personal experience here in the UK. I mean, as you could probably guess, we're in a slightly privileged position that we have a little bit of influence in getting a regular Ocado slot, and we're also shopping for my elderly in-laws, who ordinarily don't shop at Ocado. They technically aren't actually placing the order. My wife places the order for them, but they are being delighted by some of the things that they're getting, because they say to us, I'd like whatever it is, a pork joint, and we deliver to them, one of the finest organic joints that they can find. They love it. They don't actually know what it costs, but actually that was all we could actually get our hands on this particular shop, because we're buying whatever is available. So, but no, I think that does resonate. I think what is interesting, as you look at that split between private label and branded, and what we're going, there's other things that may be going on there as well, because you've got to remember that in many markets, the US, the UK included, for a period of time, you couldn't go out to eat.
Yeah.
So actually, when you look at the food market as such, and the distribution behind that, there was one very large section of the food distribution market that could not operate, and that's food service into restaurants, hotels, bars and cafes that couldn't open. As a result, the flip side of that is that customers could also not go out to eat. So many more people, of course, by definition, the opportunity, and one of the other reasons you've got a lot more, not just online, but overall traditional grocery resilience to this pandemic, is the fact that actually, many more people are eating much more food at home. Many more people are cooking. Many more people are perhaps cooking for the first time, or, they don't cook very much. But also there are people who might be thinking, well, we're eating at home. It's a lot cheaper to eat at home than it ever would have been to take my family out to the steakhouse, but I still want a nice steak. So I'm going to order, myself a nice steak, rather than just going for, the cheapest one that I can find, or the private label equivalent. So there's a lot of other underlying trends that I think have been taking place here, which influence people's choice of product.
No, absolutely. And then the second question is, this is really interesting. Since the outbreak of COVID, have you been purchasing more of your groceries online? Yes, all of my grocery purchases are now online, 22%. Most, but not all of my grocery items are purchased online, 32%. So that's over 50. And then still going to brick and mortar grocery stores is 46%. So that, to have over 50%, it sounds like we've seen already significant changes. And I guess, David, the question is, how sticky are those?
Yeah, they're interesting poll results. And I think, very, very consistent perhaps with some of the other things we touched on already. I think it's also worth reflecting, it's over 50%, and how much more would it have been if there was more capacity available in the system, to allow even more people to have shopped online. I think the interesting one also was the second point there, Deborah, that the answer was yes, but not exclusively. And I think that is true of many online customers, actually, because there are some who would fall absolutely into that first camp. I buy all of my groceries online. Absolutely. We fall into that camp, but that's perhaps no big surprise. But for many customers, you know, I think if you talk to retailers who have any meaningful online business today, but also obviously a very large bricks and mortar business today, they would mostly say that their best customers are those who shop online, but they don't necessarily only shop online, because they will tend to do a lot of their shopping, a lot of their main shopping online because of the convenience and the fact they don't actually have to push the cart. They don't actually have to walk the checkout. And if they do have home delivery, they don't have to go and pick it up themselves, or they may choose to go and pick it up themselves as well with some sort of pickup. But they're not doing two of the big things there. They're not walking the aisles, and they're not doing the checkout. But there's top-up shopping. You know, there's the in between the big shops. There's the, you know, I've run out of, or you know, my son's inviting a whole bunch of friends home after football practice, and I need to, you know, run to the store and buy 10 pizzas. But I hadn't expected that when I was, you know, planning my weekly shop. So, you know, the customers do shop more, but I think the more channels that people are engaging with a retailer, of course, creates more stickiness, not just with a particular channel, but with that particular banner or with that particular retailer. And I think that's, you know, we can talk about stickiness to a channel, but we can also talk about stickiness and loyalty, to give it another phrase, to particular retailers.
So David, when you look at the third poll question, it was, have you been purchasing more packaged food over fresh products? And 20% said yes, trying to stock up on packaged foods. 50% said depending on what I need for the week. And 30% saying trying to eat fresh foods. When you think about this coupled with sustainability and fresh wastage, what's your reaction to the poll?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I mean, I remember speaking with our own head of retail as well, and you know, in the early days of the UK lockdown, I think people tried to be very disciplined. I think then the schools shut, so the kids were at home all of the time, and then I think people started to go a little stir crazy. So we saw a big spike in things like ice cream. So I think, and lots of feel good stuff. So I think, you know, it's down to, I think it'll be down to individuals, you know, those who are trying to be disciplined in what they buy. I think going back to the previous poll question as well, I buy what I can. I think we mustn't also forget, you know, going back to supply chain, you know, obviously, we're a small island and we import a lot of our food, whereas you're a big landmass and you have a lot more self-sufficiency in certain products, but you also import quite a lot of your products as well. And of course, you know, this pandemic has had major impacts on things like the spring harvest, for example. So depending on where you're sourcing, or where particular retailers are sourcing with their suppliers, you know, produce, that can also be having an impact on supply chains. And we're certainly seeing that here in Europe, where wherever you are in Europe, you tend to import quite a lot of your product. So we're starting to see that, and you will start to see that sort of impact in availability of certain products. You may start to see that creep into prices as well of certain products as supply and demand dynamics start to impact as well.
That's helpful. Thank you for those insights. And when we look at the last poll question, it really goes back to the stickiness conversation we were having, and really supports some of your thoughts from before. For those that have been purchasing online, once restrictions ease, will you continue to purchase online for the foreseeable future? 2% said, yes, I will continue to buy all of my groceries online. 68% said, I will continue to buy some of my groceries online. And 30% said, no, I plan to shop exclusively in store. It feels in alignment with some of your comments previously. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think if you take those first two categories, which is where you get, yeah, I'll continue shopping. And the point I was making before to Deborah's poll result she gave to an earlier question, you know, people who shop online for grocery don't necessarily shop 100% for groceries online, but they tend to do the bigger ones. Because if you think about it, why do I shop online? I shop online because it's convenient. I shop online because, you know, once I've got into the habit of it, and once I've done that, as I was saying before, got over the initial hump of the first shop or the first few shops, actually it doesn't take very long and I don't have to move. You know, it takes me 5 or 10 minutes, right, you know, and I've done my weekly shop. And if I want home delivery, I don't even have to move. I just have to select something that works for me. I may choose and decide that actually I want to go and pick it up because I can plan around that as well. That's fine. But I don't have to mentally sort of trawl off and plan my time around, you know, a major grocery shop every whatever the cadence is that they use, whether it's weekly or, you know, every few days or whatever it might be. But in between that, as I say, that, you know, customers, consumers, their behavior is that they tend to top up somewhere. I think one of the other things is if people are shopping consistently online, you know, they get used to we go back to the private label point, they get used to the private labels they can get at a particular grocery store. So when they do go and do a top up, they like the consistency of getting the same private labels, or they like the consistency of the brand assortment, which is available at that grocery store. So again, that drives the loyalty for that grocery brand.
Thanks, David. We'll turn it over to audience Q&A, of which we have an unbelievable amount. We'll get through what we can, and thank you everyone for the great questions. I'll kick it off with two from the same participant. What are some of the challenges in adopting the Ocado fulfillment model in the US? And then what is the difference between Ocado's model and micro-fulfillment centers?
So good question. I think many of those on this call may know that we partner in the US with the Kroger company. It may be a better question for addressed another time to our good friends at Kroger. But I think, look, the way we approach operations for grocery online again goes back to those core principles that we apply to our own retail business in the UK. i.e., we want to be able to enable our retail partners to offer to their customers the best possible proposition online, and a lot of that is through having very good software, and a lot of that is around the organizational structure of the fulfillment and everything that comes with that. And I'll come on to what I mean by that in a minute. The other part of it is driving a sustainable cost to serve. And I think, you know, the two in many ways come hand in hand. So if you think about a customer online, you know, online is really a service-led proposition, as in if the service is not very good, people over time just won't use it. But what is the bare minimum for an online grocery service? Well, you know, we've already established people tend to buy much bigger baskets, and they're buying 40 or 50 items at once. If they buy 50 items, they want 50 items, but they want the precise 50 items that they've ordered. They don't want 45 of one and then 5 substitutions. So they want that. We've talked about fresh product, and one of the pushbacks I think for customers shopping online has been around, I want to select my fresh myself because I'm the only one who knows how to pick an avocado that's right. Actually, interestingly, through this crisis, a lot of people are starting to realize that when they do shop online, they get a pretty decent avocado. So they're getting over another hump. But the final one is, again, allied to whether it's with home delivery or whether it's pickup, I select a slot. I either select a dedicated pickup slot or I select a dedicated home delivery slot. And if I'm shopping, then I want it ready in that slot. I want it delivered in that time frame that I've selected myself. So those are kind of the 3 core tenets, and they're all sort of enabled by how we work with the partners in building and establishing together the right sort of fulfillment capability, fulfillment asset capability, allied with the proprietary software that controls it all. And I think the programs that we work with our partners, whether they're in the US or anywhere else in our partnership framework, are aimed and allied to setting that up accurately and effectively. I think if I were just to point outside of the US, we have actually launched during this pandemic period the first 2 international fulfillment centers with 2 of our other partners, both in Paris and in Toronto with our Canadian partner. So we actually launched those during the COVID crisis. I heard part of the question talking about micro-fulfillment. There is also this, we sit here in the UK looking out around some of these debates that are taking place, more around commentators, I think, than necessarily the retailers themselves, although of course it is a very important concern and consideration for them. And there seems to be this polarization of view that there is, in the red corner, there is a large scale automated facility approach, and in the blue corner, there's a micro fulfillment approach. Well, look, here's something to think about. We build both. Yeah. We build large ones, we build medium-sized ones, we build small ones, we build micro fulfillment centers. We have, we have these operating here in the UK. Interestingly, and this should be no big surprise, there is a trade-off between scale and economics. It's very simple. I go back to the point, and JoAnn's very good point, this is a razor thin margin business, but the point I added to it is it's a very high volume business. It's high volume for a reason. Margins are thin, so in order to actually get there, you have to have big volume. It's also high volume because people eat a lot of food. This is not a niche business. This is a high volume mainstream business. So, but because of this difference in economics, depending on the scale, you may find that actually, and we use our micro fulfillment centers for a different use case, a different customer use case. It's more around shorter order lead time, immediacy, and less about, fulfilling the very large regular orders which make up the mainstream grocery market, So it may be that you find different types of fulfillment in the same way we've found different types of fulfillment size is more suitable to servicing different types of use case. So it's not a sort of silver bullet, winner takes all in this approach. I think as retailers are thinking about how to approach online, I think it's important to understand what is the geography they're trying to serve, what is the customer catchment they're trying to serve, and what is the customer use case they're trying to provide for? Because the answer may be different depending on what it is that they're trying to achieve.
David, we talked a lot about the impact online, but what can you share about your perspective about the future of actual bricks and mortar grocery and the impact to them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I appreciate many on this call have very, very sizable bricks and mortar businesses. It will be the main part of their business today. Look, it's been a tough and challenging time for everyone. I think one of the interesting things we've seen, particularly here in the UK and also more broadly in Europe, actually, is that traditional grocers have, there's been a resilience naturally in the business that they do. One of the things that has perhaps characterized it a little bit is that actually they've done quite well against one of the other sort of sub categories in the grocery sector, and that's the hard discount sector, which has been expanding very rapidly in recent years here in the UK and also across many European countries, and of course has been knocking on the door in the US as well. There has been for some time a bit of a debate in terms of the very narrow assortment that hard discount tends to have as their proposition. And interestingly, this time of COVID-19, one of the things that consumers is trying to do is limit the frequency that they have to go to the grocery store. So what they tended to be doing is consolidating multiple trips to the store into a much larger order. And they want to have access to all of the, whereas before they might have run between stores. They might have run between 2 or 3 different stores in order to complete their entire mission. Now they just want to consolidate it into one trip, and they want to reduce the frequency of even going to that one store. So you're seeing much bigger baskets, and you're seeing, in some cases, they're cutting out the trip to the one store where they really only go to buy just a few items because those are the few items they could get at that store. So that's one interesting thing. Obviously, during this, again, this difficult time, and I think as we come out, start to have that sort of gentle easing out of this period, what are the provisions that physical retailers also have to be putting in place? And, whether that is, of course, first and foremost and paramount to this is ensuring the safety of customers and the associates who work in that store. So all of the social distancing requirements that are required, queuing both outside of the store, limiting the number in the store at any particular point in time, the careful distancing of open checkouts. So can you actually operate with every other checkout open for a period of time? Of course, all of this slows down the process of getting a set number of customers through your store. So also thinking around operating hours, do you open a little earlier? We've seen here in the UK, and I'm sure you've seen in your markets, retailers opening and giving dedicated hours to certain sets of customers, whether they're key workers in the health profession or whether they are registered vulnerable persons, So all of that, do you have later shopping hours? How does that impact with, local or state regulation in terms of how long you can open and operate? So lots of that. I think the other thing that's been very apparent has been, a willingness and a keenness to share and hear experiences. And, grocery is by definition a very local business. But actually the challenges grocers have been facing during this pandemic are very common. And one of the things we've been able to help facilitate is actually bringing together our global partners to share some of their experiences. And I'm sure other groups, I know certainly in North America, you know, certain industry bodies are bringing retailers together to share some of those experiences very effectively. And I think, you know, there's nothing like a problem shared to help ease the burden of trying to work out, you know, what we should be doing, not just now, but also as we move forward.
Well, David, it's wonderful you're doing that for the industry. For those of you on the call, I'll ask one more question and then let JoAnn close it out. I apologize. I know we have a lot of questions in the queue, and thank you everyone for all your great questions. So I'm choosing my question carefully, David. But looking out longer term strategically, do you expect online grocery to remain a discrete type of order, i.e. only grocery items, or will the offering and consumer behavior evolve into a mixed basket of groceries and general merchandise? If so, how is Ocado positioned?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the ways to perhaps think about this, and one of the ways I think about it is, you know, how do I shop in the offline world? How do I shop, you know, by going to stores, you know? And there is an opportunity. I think the opportunity is, if you're shopping online for your grocery, if you can add in products which naturally come to you and you feel are adjacent to your core grocery shopping, mentally, you'll add them in. If it's something that's too far removed, you know, if I'm shopping for my groceries, am I really going to also start shopping for a mattress, for example? Probably not. If I'm going out to shop for a mattress, i.e. a general merchandise item, am I really going to suddenly think, oh, there's a grocery store attached to this mattress shop, I'm going to go and do my grocery shop? Probably not. But if I'm doing my core grocery item and I think, you know, I've spent far too long walking around the garden in my black socks, not really thinking about this during lockdown, and now all my socks I use for work have got holes in. Oh, look, there's some socks in the online aisle here. I'll just add them to my basket. Of course I'll buy them. So, I mean, there are certain categories that are very naturally adjacent to your core grocery offer. So, you know, things to do with the pet, things to do with the home. Clearly, health and beauty is an area of extension that you can be thinking about. So I think there is naturally an opportunity to do that. I think, are you likely to do your core grocery shopping and be thinking about, you know, fast fashion necessarily as part of the same mission? Maybe, but it becomes slightly more tenuous. They're kind of different missions. If you're looking for, you know, a smart new suit to wear to an event, then that kind of is a different sort of mission. Remember, grocery shopping is also quick. Going back to the point we were saying before, you know, it is a chore in many respects, and it's one you kind of want to do relatively swiftly. If it's an item where actually you'd rather spend some time researching, it's probably not something that naturally comes as part of your, you know, your regular grocery shop. Yeah, I come back to the challenge of selling things online is different for food and grocery than perhaps it is for, you know, selling a new camera lens, where you're going to do quite a lot of research to before you press buy. They're different missions. But yes, I think that the bottom line is, if you can consistently attract your customer to regularly shop grocery, then the opportunity to add further categories in is there. I think the reverse is not necessarily true. If you are a general merchandise retailer, you don't have that frequency, regularity of your customer coming into your online shop, and hence the opportunity to sell more is more limited.
No, that's very helpful. And as we're at the top of the hour, I want to thank David for his extensive answers. And I mean, in this time where online grocery is literally the hottest topic, and how we're going to automate, we want to thank you so much, David. And JoAnn, thank you so much for the great questions, and we'll see everyone soon.
Deborah,
Thanks,
JoAnn,
everyone.
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
David.
Bye.